Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Progeny podcast. Today I am joined by Nour Jørgensen from Denmark, a graduate in history of religion and Arabic, who has also obtained a master's in Islamic studies. In today's episode, we'll discuss the life and role of Imam Sajjad during the events of Ashura. We will look at the power of the supplications of Imam Sajjad in As-Sahifa al-Sajjadiyya, as well as the treaties of rights and the tools that we can gain from these specific texts. Sister Nour, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you for joining us on this special podcast. Firstly, how are you finding London?
Oh, very well. It's very different from Denmark.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, there's a lot of diversity and it's interesting getting to know London.
Okay, so you prefer here or do you prefer back home?
Oh, I can't really tell, can I?
Okay. Well, it's good to have you in London. I say that because we've managed to have you on this podcast. In today's podcast, as I mentioned to you, I want to discuss the Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. We're going through the time of Arba'in, this period in which a lot of people go for the ziyarat of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Firstly, have you been to ziyarat to Karbala or Najaf yet, or?
I have been for ziyarah, but tomorrow will be my first time trying for Arba'in. So
Inshallah. I hope you get there safely and return safely, inshallah. Firstly, how did you start your research and study on Imam Sajjad alayhi salam? What inspired you to look into the life of Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him?
I think studying at the Hausa and living there, the supplications or the prayers became a normal routine, and I came across the Dua Makarimul Akhlaq, and it fascinated me. Like, I was mesmerized by it, because if you want to read it in the sense of understanding God, you will find God there. If you want to read it in the sense of understanding who the Prophet and the Imams, peace be upon them, were, like, you're going to find them there. If you want to stand there, or if you want to get to know the Imam of our time, you will find him there. And also, if you want to get to know yourself, of course, this text has been the massive influence of ethics and the study of ethics. So because of this prayer, I was introduced to the study of ethics. And when I had to choose what major I wanted to go into, I chose philosophy of ethics. And going into my thesis, it became very natural to me that it was something related to Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, or something related to his prayers.
With regards to Imam Sajjad, I know you've researched into the journey of Imam Sajjad after Karbala. From your research, what can we learn about Imam Sajjad? Firstly, while in Karbala, why he couldn't, obviously, from your own research, why he couldn't partake in the war, and then his journey after the events of Karbala and Ashura.
So Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, fell sick and couldn't take part of the battle or defending them. So I've read narrations, I read like points from our history books on him even being so sick that he was in and out of consciousness. So he was like, and I always imagine this image of him waking up and then hearing the horrors of what was going on and then falling out of consciousness again. And there's this beautiful part, where he hears his father, Imam Hussein, peace be upon him, calling out for help. And he was like trying to get up and try to reach his father. But also we're told by his father, you have another position. But I imagine myself being there, because going through this kind of horrors, like, you want to do something, you want to flee this natural human instincts. So we have to understand the Imams, peace be upon them, from this perspective, right? So as long as they're in the human body, they still feel the same kind of things that we feel.
Yeah.
Right? They still feel this frightened, they still feel pain, they still feel those kind of things. So I've never had one Muharram where I didn't see the whole event through the eyes of Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him. Mm-hmm. He was there sick. He then had to be protected by his aunt. Sayyidah Zainab. And also going through can you imagine, as a man in that era, even in this time, not being able to protect the women and the children, not being able to protect your father, your uncle, your brothers, and the rest of the family. It must have been, I can't even imagine the horrors that he went through. So that was the whole scene of his life. That was the first day of him being the imam. Imagine what kind of start that is for being an imam, And then
the journey begins.
Yeah. And then he had to walk next to the body of his father, peace be upon him. And the horrific scene where we have narrations from Sayyidah Zainab describing him as he was fainting. So also understanding Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, you also have to understand his relationship and his position with Sayyidah Zainab and how they supported each other through these horrors that were going on.
And then the another difficult part is obviously getting to Sham, Syria today, and then being taken into the palace of Yazid, which of course, as I mentioned, we remember the whole story during these nights and these weeks. There's the very famous sermon which he has given, which is narrated. From your research on Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, how reliable is this sermon? And why do you think not enough, I say, attention is given to the sermon, even though it's quite a powerful sermon?
It is. I think we have a misconception in our communities about Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him. So we refer to him as the Imam who cried a lot, right?
Or the sick. That's how we know him.
Yeah. And, that's what amazes me about him. The way that he tackled all this hardship that he went through. And his life from that day on, not only the sermon was beautiful. And as they say, there was the palace of Yazid was shaking because of the power of these sermons. Imagine having to go through that, all the horrors that he went through, even having the chains around your neck, burning your skin, and people mocking you, people laughing at you, and the way not even understanding who you are, and still being able to deliver such a sermon. So, regards to history, there will always be different opinions, even about his supplications. There were a lot of discussions about, is it really his supplication? Can we date from a historical point of view, from research point of view, that it was his supplications?
Interesting.
But most researchers today say, no, it must be. Or at least it's someone with some divine connection, because the power of these sermons, the power of the supplications. And the same thing with the sermon. And there's so much we can learn from it. But I think it doesn't go with the general narrative of him being the sick imam, or him being sick, or him being...
the crying.
Yeah, the imam who cried. So that's why I think we don't pay much attention to the powerful character traits that Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, had.
Academically, is there much... and we'll go into the supplications in a bit, but is there much written on Imam Sajjad in the academic world?
No, not at all. He's really, and it amazed me because we have so much knowledge about Ashura and the events.
Sorry to interrupt. I know in even though he's a figure that's well respected in all Muslim sects, in the Sunni sect there are some mentions of him in some books. So I'm surprised that nothing is mentioned of him academically.
Yeah, it depends on what perspective. So, of course, he's mentioned in relation to supplications and the Book of the Rites, but not really much about his life in general. I think that's where the lessons are. How did he handle his life after those horrors that he saw, that event, the 10th of Muharram? And that's where the real lessons are. So even in academia, we don't have much research. And it could be interesting even from... So as for today, we talk a lot about mental health issues, how to deal with trauma, etc., etc. And we have the answers right here, but there's not much research really done on this area.
What about with regards to Sahifa Sajjadiyya, which is, full of these great supplications, and Risalat al-Huquq, as you mentioned, the treatise of rights, which speaks about the rights of your body parts, as well as people linked with you, whether it's your mother, your neighbor, all these different rights. Is there much academically? Have they been, has anyone taken these rights and written, maybe done a PhD or some sort of research on them? If not, don't you feel sometimes, the Shias themselves should be doing stuff like this?
I have never come across any PhD or any research specifically on it. And yes, of course, in the Qom and maybe also in the Najaf atmosphere, there's a lot of things done about, especially within the studies of ethics. Mm-hmm. But I think from academia and the Western universities, we need a lot of knowledge about this. And even going into the discussions on whether it could be his supplications or not. Like all these historical discussions on, is it reliable? Did somebody else write it, etc.? But we can say for certain, I know that from my own personal life, doing interfaith work, doing work in prisons, etc., these books are so well used, not only by Shias, but also by Sunni Muslims and from Christians and non-Muslim, because, everybody is lacking that in their life. Aren't we? Like, we're all searching for that happiness, that meaning, that purpose. And we all like the small quotes and the small pictures on social media about love and happiness and meaning of life. And the Imam has already served that for us in these books. So that's why a lot of people, no matter background, they still found inspiration in these books.
I know, and I don't know if you've come across this, but in the Sufi texts, there's a lot of similar dhikrs, maybe not the same words, but similar sort of meanings to some of the du'as of Imam Sajjad. Obviously, they don't, sadly, attribute it to Imam Sajjad. I don't know, have you come across any of the Sufi texts that are very similar to the du'as and the supplications of Imam Sajjad?
Yeah, there is a book called the Khusala, and that has a lot of beautiful prayers in it. But I also met a lot of Sufis who actually take a lot of knowledge from not only the Ahl Bayt, peace be upon them, but also Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him. So I think that his work, that's what amazes me about it. So you have to understand what kind of environment that he lived in. Yazid was still the ruler. This person, who had your whole family killed, and not even killed, but like slaughtered in the most horrific ways, have humiliated you, the women have chained you, you still have to live under that ruler. And that ruler, even like a few years after, said it was all right, for the during the rebellion of Medina, the women were raped. I said, there is no honor of the women of Medina. Like, there was the most, like, we don't even pay much attention to who Yazid was maybe before, but not even after, because he kept on having this same behavior. So Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, he had to be smart, right? He had to act with a lot of hikmah. He had to act with a lot of grace in order to keep Islam alive. And Yazid couldn't care much for supplications. Mm-hmm. That's why all the teachings are formed in supplications.
From du'as.
Yeah. Because they're actually they're political tools for us. We will understand our religion, politics, history, the imams, ourselves, how to interact. All these kind of things are hidden in the prayers and the supplications. But we don't see that when we first read it. And we have this horrible habit of thinking, it's just a supplication book. It's just a prayer manual. We're just going to leave it on the shelf until that specific day or that specific time of year where we need that. But it has tools for us to even understand every single aspect of our lives. And he wrote a lot about politics in them, but he had to hide it so Yazid wouldn't notice, because he wouldn't care much about supplications. Of course, yeah.
How does one, I mean, this always is a question that comes to mind. How does one who goes through so much horror, such a tragedy, can still continue to preach to the people, if not the killers of his family, if not those that participated in the war, but at least we can say those that did not care. They stayed quiet about the killing. They did not stand up with Imam Hussein by even saying a word. They kept themselves at home because, and this also, I always bring this up, is, a lot of people say, the Kufans, they let the Imam down and they didn't stand up with Imam Hussein. I sometimes say, where were the people of Medina? About the people of Mecca? If you look at the companions of, I know this is a side point, but if you look at the majority of the 70 or 80 or however many people were with Imam Hussein, the majority were from Kufa. So how does, coming back to the question, how does one preach to the people that did not stand up with his father and let his father be killed? And his father, obviously, is the grandson of the Prophet.
This is one of the things that really amazes me about him. So it's not me coming and telling you should do good, right? That only good repels evil, that only good erases evil. This is a person who's seen the worst kind of evil. When he talks about evil in his books or in his works, imagine what kind of evil that is. And then he also, there's two different things of the answer I want to give. Another one is a clear example. When Marwan came to Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, during the rebellion, where he, of course, was scared for the lives of the women and the children, because women were raped. He came to Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, and look at who came, right? Marwan. It was not a friend of his. It was not on the contrary, somebody a clear enemy of the family of the Prophet, peace be upon them. He came and he still asked. And imagine, why would you do that? Why would you ask someone
that you've partook in the war against his dad?
Because even his enemies, you may say, they knew of his qualities, right? It's like they knew.
He wouldn't turn them away.
No.
Yeah.
So they came and he said, what is the crime of these women and children? And imagine, wasn't that the same words that his father just said about his baby brother? Like, can this baby not have some water? What is the crime of this child? Etc., etc. So it's very funny how, there's this loop where everything goes in circle and he's like, no, just invite them in. They have done no crimes. And some narrations, some reports say there was over 400 women staying there, seeking protection. And those are the people, imagine, if it was us, we could say, see, I told you so. Look at this ruler. You didn't care when he was targeting my family and me, but now you care because it's targeting your family. Yeah. But that's the beautiful thing about Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him. He is teaching us not how you should repel, but how you should be. Right? Whenever he says in his supplication, only good repels or only good erases evil, he doesn't say only justice erases evil. He doesn't say only revenge. He don't say only holding a grudge. No, he say only good. And no matter what prayer you're reading, no matter what, even in the rites, he's always trying to strive to do good. So he was in an environment where there was so much horror, but he turned it around and teaching people, this is how you should be. And he had to do it in such a way. But that's, even if I didn't believe in his divine relation with God and being a part of the household of the Prophet, peace be upon them, this would be the proof. How could a person do these kind of things? These are some of the reasons why Christians later on in history called Jesus the Son of God. Because they saw these beautiful qualities within him. That people did horrors to him, but he was still acting and behaving good. And I honestly sometimes think maybe it's a blessing in disguise. Maybe there's a hikmah from God to why he is, this is hidden. It is known in our communities. We know that it's in our books, but why do we not pay more attention to it? And maybe it's good. Maybe we would have had similar reactions if people really understood the character traits of Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, really understood how can a person go through that kind of horrors, have gone through massive trauma, And he still talks about him crying. And when people ask him about crying, he said, of course I'm going to cry. How can I not? Mm-hmm. And going through trauma, even in our own life, we know that it changes us forever. So whenever I always imagine him sitting, maybe he didn't write it down, but he was telling people, writing down the dua for noble traits and like talking about that only good can repel evil and asking God to replace the hate with love. Imagine what kind of hate that he knows of. And then he still asks for God to replace it with love. And I always imagine him sitting there writing this down or preaching this to his
companion.
Yeah. And then thinking of what kind of hate, like there was not 1 second of his life that he did not remember what happened that day. And that teaches us that even despite what have happened in our lives, we know and we can accept that it's to be a part of our life. We don't need to go back to who we were before that happened. We can have the wounds and they can heal, and we can have scars and we can beautify the scars. We don't need to open the wound all the time. We don't need to cover the scars. And I think that's the issue.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
That's the issues we have. We want to go back to before the trauma instead of beautifying it and say, yeah, I went through this, but I'm not going to let that define me. I am not what happened to me. I am the person who rose. I am the person that despite A, B, and C happening to me, I am still doing good. If we have someone doing something to you, you went through a trauma, or it can be a small thing or like a larger thing, then you identify with that trauma. But the people, the person who have done this to you, they will just win, right? They will have the control over you until you die because you let them be a part of that trauma. You let them be a part of your identity and your self-image. But Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, he teaches us you have to let go of that because there's so much more. You have to rise above this and you have to show them, you treated me this way, it's all right. I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for all these good things. Like even he has in his prayers that may God give him the grace to whenever people are backbiting. Such a small common problem we have in the communities. If people are backbiting, please God, give me the grace so I can have a good mention of them. Mm-hmm. All these on all different kinds of layers. And yeah, that's...
As you mentioned something which reminds me of the famous line of, especially when you spoke about healing, the famous line of Sayyidah Zainab which says, Ma ra'aytu illa jamila, I have seen nothing but beauty. And, that sort of describes how the Ahlul Bayt, and again, we mentioned Lady Zainab and Imam Sajjad, peace be upon them both, how they were this great partnership that formed. And something that I want to pick up on is this, and you touched upon it. I've heard, of course, we've heard the story of Marwan coming to Imam Sajjad on many occasions, but you mentioned something very important. I feel is that if we're talking about our lives, if you've upset someone, you won't really go to them for a favor because they'll say no to you. No, and they knew that. They'd get without asking for return, which is the same. You just mentioned with Marwan, he came because he knew that Imam Sajjad wouldn't turn him away. And again, all these famous stories, and again because you've studied this in an academic atmosphere, what do you feel needs to be done for this to be spread more? Whether it's these stories or these supplications, what do you think we as a community need to do? Repay you in some way. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think that's also the basic for why we see not only these examples, but all of the imams, right? So that comes to your question. What do? We have a lack of knowledge in our communities. So look at it. We have the most beautiful role models in our communities. We have the most beautiful role models. We have every single answer. Are you going through something? I'm telling you, some of the imams went through it, right? To some degree. You can always find
an answer or way or anything in the biographies or the lives of the Imams, peace be upon them. There's a huge lack of knowledge. I think we could, if we really implemented like new tradition, not new in the sense of removing Dua Kumil from Thursday and then putting in a new, but also gathering together and like reciting these, understanding these, having study groups about where people will reflect upon it. So we don't need to have studied 5 years, 10 years, have done all your research about it. But I would love to sit in groups with the community, taking one line after the other and discussing what kind of reflection, what does this bring to mind? How can we implement this in our own lives? So I think that might be one of the things that we could do just to get more knowledge. Because as I said earlier, we have that, most of us have the book at home, and all the books at home, or we can find them online. It's not something that's so rare that we cannot find it. And that's another thing. It's so beautiful how God protected, right? We have lost so many books in history, but this has been protected. And there is a reason behind that. And I honestly feel like Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, he thought of us, of our community, where we don't have a direct connection to the Imam of our time. But having these supplications, we would know how he would think. We would know how he wanted us to act. So I think like generally more community work on bringing this supplication into like workshops, however like the community feels like doing it. So yeah.
I think because something that is definitely lacking is that the du'as such as, for example, one famous dua that every follower of the Ahl Bayt would know is dua Abu Hamza al-Thamali. And everyone's like, oh, this is the best dua. I love dua Abu Hamza. I can't wait to read it. And you're like, why can't you wait to read it? They're like, oh, because we read it in Ramadan, Laylatul Qadr. And you're like, but why only in Ramadan? So I think this is something that, and you said that, you know, our sort of understanding of Imam Sajjad is limited. Of course, no matter how much you study Imam Sajjad, you'll never really know the true essence. But it's even worse when your understanding is limited to what we say in Arabic. We use the word alil, the sick, the ill, which I sometimes think. It's good to remember him in Karbala, and obviously it's good to mention that, you know, he went through this illness, while the battle was taking place. But then we limit him to this, and then we limit him to the Imam crying for 30 odd years because he lived after Ashura for 34 or 35 years after Ashura. So we'll say, you know, every time he was given food or water, he would cry, which is, as you mentioned, you know, there wouldn't be a single second in his life where he doesn't think about Ashura and the events of Karbala. Yet, it's all good knowing these two things. We've neglected everything else from his du'as, like Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, Dua Abu Hamza, Dua at-Tawbah, and many other du'as that are present in As-Sahifa Sajjadiyya. They're present in our books, but they're present for the Laylatul Qadr. They're present for when I'm in Hajj. Mm-hmm. They're present when I'm in, you know, and when I'm in real trouble in my life and I need a powerful dua, then I'll go to it. But that's about it, I guess. And that's I feel, you know, injustice being done by us to them.
I've seen a lot of people who have gone into, who are non-Muslims, but have gone into this new age, like mindfulness and all these thoughts. So you have the concept of having a mantra, right? Mm-hmm. Or having meditation. And you do that, not because sometimes we do interfaith work and people ask you, why do you need to pray in specific times? Mm-hmm. It's like, because I pray when I feel good and when I don't feel good, and when I don't care and when I care, and when I'm stressed and when I'm not stressed, and when I'm lazy. Like, there is a powerful thing in doing something as a habit, doing something that we don't understand the full like hikmah behind why we need to do this. But then having the concept of having a mantra, I did this to myself. So I chose a certain line in a supplication by Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him. I thought this is very important to my life right now. So I'm going to read this every single day. It's not long because we can't really take much burden upon ourselves. We still have like a life that we have to attend to. So instead of reading the full dua with like 20 minutes or reading a part of it with 10 minutes, no, I'm just going to read one line. But I'm going to promise myself, I'm going to read this line every single day. And you know what? It really changed your life. Like there's no hardship, you just have a new perspective of things. But I think we fail as a community when we have made it a thing where we read it only in Ramadan or only here, because we can feel it. We love Ramadan, don't we? Because we feel spiritual. But what if you do the same practices you don't need to fast every day. You don't need to read supplications or pray that takes like 1 hour, 2 hours every day. You can do small things. And there is a hikmah by doing things as, I don't want to quote any of the imams wrongly, but, doing a small deed every day or as a habit is better for you than doing a lot, and only once in a while. So we can really implement this in our life. And it also comes to the purpose of our whole being. Our purpose of our being is to find happiness, right? God created that in you. Created that like eagerness to find happiness. We can see it in all humans. It doesn't matter who you are. You want happiness. We find happiness in love, so people are searching for love. This is all aspects. We would have children and feel that kind of love, and we will feel like that's the purpose of life. But in reality, the purpose of life is to be near God. Like it's to worship, but worship in this sense of purpose, meaning having nearness to God or being close to God. But we can't be close to God in a physical way. So he taught us his attributes, and he planted that. He planted the seeds of those attributes within you. That's why we have ethics. That's why the imams are teaching us these things. That's why Imam Sajjad and his example is so important to us. Because not only does he teach us about God, etc., but he is giving you the full manual of this is the purpose of your life. Right? Are you searching for something? It's there. But we need, as communities, we need to implement that as well and not limit in thinking, it's only for Thursday nights or Mondays or Ramadan or this night and this night. But we have a lot to work on. And that's the good thing. We already have the tools, right? So we just need to change that final bit for us to implement it as a normal thing. And I think we could see our whole community blossom because we see every single person who've come across this, and like every single person, doesn't matter whether it's just one line a day or a short piece or like a section of it every single day. If you do that, you blossom. And I think if we do that as a community, we would really blossom.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned prayer, that you do it whether you're happy, sad, you care, you don't care. And again, going back to Karbala and going back to the 11th of Muharram, again, we listen to this all the time, and then we listen to it and then it upsets us. But again, we don't maybe do that extra step, I feel. And again, this is a general point. Not everyone obviously is the same, but that when we remember on the 11th of Muharram, Imam Sajjad looks at his auntie, Lady Zainab, peace be upon them both, and he tells her, I noticed that you're praying your Salat al-Layl, your night prayers, while sitting down. And then, she responds that the tragedy of your father, Imam Hussein, has left me in such a state where I don't have any energy to stand up. And, it's again, a very sad moment that we narrate. But the lesson there is that even on, going through what she went through, which, as much as we recite and we narrate and we read about it, it's really hard to actually comprehend what she went through, what those holy eyes of Lady Zainab, peace be upon her, saw on that day. It's very difficult for us to understand. Yet even though she's gone through that, she hasn't forgotten, not her normal prayers, not the obligatory prayers. She hasn't forgotten the mustahab, the recommended prayers. I talk about myself. if something's wrong within my life, before you know it, prayer is something that I'll put aside because something's happened in my life. And as I mentioned, I keep saying this, we take some parts that we feel are important, and we leave the rest, and we forget that the religion of Islam did not come for us to. It's not a pick and mix. You can't choose what you like, and what doesn't suit you, which again brings me back to Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him. From the research that you went through, what because this I feel is very important, from the du'as, from these supplications, and you mentioned this, what part do you feel was political from these supplications? I don't know if you could remember the lines or the particular du'as, the particular supplications were political that you've come across or you feel were political.
So doing the analysis, doing the research, there are lines, unfortunately I don't remember specific, but there are a lot of lines. I read a book, it's an amazing book, I don't remember the name, but bless the author, talking about how whenever Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, used to refer to them, or there's a line in the dua for noble traits where the Imam is asking God to protect him against the hand who would be unjust towards him or harm him. And all this, this is a reference to the ruler.
Yeah.
So they might be well hidden. But another thing I thought of, like this is a complete off topic, but we live in communities or in societies where we tackle Islamophobia. And as a woman, I know wearing hijab or wearing the headscarf in public, you will sometimes have to tackle Islamophobia. How do we go around dealing with governments that we find unjust? Right. So the Imam already answered that in his prayers. And I find it very beautiful that he never went out and seeking rebellion or seeking revenge.
Yeah.
But he understood that there's a hikmah, not that it wasn't in his place with other parts of history, but he understood there is a hikmah behind changing yourself or using this as inspiration to do good and showing them this is how you should behave. Because as we know, probably if he would have done the same, what would Yazid have done? There's a hikmah behind him teaching us about the government in this hidden way.
So there's, I'm sure there's many hidden gems in these supplications, which you beautifully mentioned. That how do we deal with unjust or nowadays with Islamophobic agendas against us? So there's so many gems, and one of these gems which you mentioned, which is again a problem that is very much spoken about, I guess, is that of mental health. It's a trending topic. Of course, it's very important, not to put it down. It's a very important topic. A lot of people are suffering from it. A lot of people are trying to seek the best way to tackle this. And of course, there's different levels of what kind of mental health, leading to some sort of sometimes depression or severe depressions. And again, you mentioned that the supplications of Imam Sajjad are a tool, we can say, because of course we believe, just like with your health, with your physical health, there's du'as, there's supplications for your physical health, but it doesn't mean you don't go see the doctor or you say, I'm not going to take any medication. You can do both. Same with with anyone that's suffering with anything to do with mental health. What are the lessons that are gained? What are the hidden gems that you've come across from from this great man, Imam Sajjad, through his supplications. And of course, knowing that he went through all these horrors that he did.
I think you mentioned something very important. So if you are going through depression, not that you are depressed in but you are going through depression, you have any other mental health issues, you need to seek.
The correct, yeah.
Yeah, you need to seek someone who is professional in this area.
Yeah, of course.
But as for feeling down, feeling depressed, it was this is also after, right? So I have gone through a trauma. I now get help. But how do I tackle my everyday life? I might have gone through the trauma. It's there in the past, but these prayers, also these supplications, helps you to understand, you know what, trauma doesn't need to be something you put behind. You don't need to remember it as this is a part, if ever I meet you for the first time, I'm going to tell you all this trauma of my life. Because that shows you who you are, right? What are the first things we tell people about ourselves? That shows who we identify as.
Yeah.
And if one of those first things we tell other people is something traumatic or something related to trauma in your life, that trauma might be following you. We can't say that trauma doesn't change you. It does. If something happened, if an event happened, you will not be the same person. You will not react in the same way the day before as the day after. These would be two different reactions. There would be two different mindsets. There would be two different ways of understanding the world. But what the Imam then teaches us is using that, accepting you have this. This has been a part of you. There's nothing wrong with have gone through trauma. You're perfectly fine. But instead of opening the wounds all the time, let's beautify those scars. So when we stand in front of God, we might be full of scars, but the only thing God will see is all the beautiful things that you did, right? So the day after the Imam, peace be upon him, died, there was a sudden poverty in Medina. And a man asked his son, Imam Baqir, peace be upon him, said, do you know of this? And he said, yes, that was my father. He was going around every single night, covered, making sure every single person had enough food. So there wouldn't be any poverty. And imagine this is a person who easily, in our context, was like, I have the right to be depressed my whole life. I'm just going to hide away. I'm not going to do anything for other people. Even when we interact with other people, right? If I do something to you and then come and apologize, I often don't just say, I'm sorry. I would say, I'm sorry, I did this because A, B, and C. Oh, I'm sorry, I did this because I was stressed. I did this because blah, blah, blah. In reality, that other person that you are apologizing to don't need to hear it.
That's one of the reasons.
You are the person who needs to say that because you want to feel good about yourself. You want to justify the things that you just did. That's why you're saying it out loud. It's not for the benefit of the other person. But imagine this. And then the Imam still teaches us that, you know what, let go of that. We just do good for the sake of good. And we apologize for the sake of apologizing.
There's a narration which comes to mind, which is narrated, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, by the 8th Imam, Ali ibn Musa al-Rada, peace be upon him, who speaks about As-Safh al-Jamil. He says the beautiful forgiveness or the beautiful pardon, in which he says when you go to seek forgiveness from someone that you've upset or ask for someone to forgive you, to pardon you, and the person says, you know, I'm sorry, then you shouldn't ask for excuses or reasons, because the fact that they've, and this is to add to your point, that when you come to say sorry, don't give reasons. And I paraphrase, the Imam says that if the person's coming to say sorry to you, don't ask for reasons, and don't say, you know, why did you do this? You know, why couldn't you do this? Instead, just the fact that he's coming to say sorry to you, just accept his forgiveness. If obviously it's a true, with a true heart. And again, going back to to Karbala, and this I always bring up as well when I look at forgiveness, is when Hur comes to say, "Oh Imam, can I apologize to you? Is there a tawbah? And can I be repentant to Allah?" And the Imam doesn't say, "Oh Hur, why did you do this? Why did you put my women, my family, my children through this hardship?" Because if we, again, if we go through history, it was Hur at the start. He says, if you're sincere, then Allah will forgive you. And I think these, again, I keep coming back to the same point. We hear these every year, if not, more than once during the year. And alhamdulillah, it's a blessing. I thought about this the other day. I don't know if you agree. I thought, alhamdulillah, that we have the imams, of course, but alhamdulillah that we have shahadat and wiladats of the Ahlul Bayt, where we commemorate and celebrate their martyrdoms and their birth dates. And I said, this is really good, because as a community, we end up going to the mosque quite a lot, because forget, we're blessed to have the 10, 15, whatever, 20 nights during the month of Muharram and Safar, sometimes even more. But we have so there's always that connection we have, because obviously when we go to the mosque, we listen to the Quran, there's a supplication, there's probably a lecture which we learn from, but there's that connection that is always there. Sometimes we've left that connection. And we listen to these lessons, we gain from them, upsets us, we'll cry about them, but then we won't practice them in our lives. And the Prophet, and when he delivered the message of Islam, even though it was delivered theoretically through the Quran and through his words, but he also did this practically. So, for example, when he said, "O people, you are created from male and female and tribes, so you can get to know each other. Inna akramakum indallah atqakum." The best out of you is the person that is more pious through his deeds. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, or if you're from this country, or if you're an Arab or a non-Arab. You're all the same in the eyes of God. He didn't just say this and say, "This is okay, now let's." He actually practiced it, where the people around him were from different nations, from different backgrounds, different races. So we are very good. And again, this is a general point, so I don't want everyone to say, "Oh, why are you saying this? We're not like this." We are very good at preaching, but we're not very good at actually practically showing this. I don't know how you feel as someone that's also a convert to Islam. Yeah. Do you see this? I don't know if
yeah, of course, especially when you're introduced to Islam through books and through stories, and you might be a bit disappointed in meeting people. Okay. And now I'm a part of the Muslim community myself, so I can also say that about myself. I need to remind myself that we have with a huge blessing also comes a responsibility.
That's true.
And we have the truth, we have these blessings, we have these reminders. And as you mentioned, we both have the days of the martyrdoms and also the birth. And there needs to be this balance. We don't only mourn losing them and the way they were killed, but we also celebrate that they have walked this earth. They are our role models. But yes, as for then implementing all these kind of things in our communities, in ourselves, I think we need a lot of awareness about who we're actually dealing with. And I feel like that's a responsibility for everyone in the community.
Yeah, it's not just the scholar or the person dealing with the mosque.
Yeah, we need to remind ourselves or each other, or even if there's a community, asking the scholar to speak more about the lives of the imams. If you want to get to know them, if you want to understand, and you can have reflection groups on how can I implement this in my own personal life? Are we really going to be the followers? What chances are that the imam of our time is going to come and he's going to look at us and saying, "You know what? You were giving the most blessings. You were giving all the tools. Now I'm going to leave you the end, because Like all these other people, they knew how to implement good manners. They knew how to behave, but you got all the tools. Like, who are you to say, no, we were not, like, we didn't have any knowledge of this? Because we did. But that's a huge, you know, with everything, like all kind of change in our behavior with habits, we know that it's so easy to get a bad habit, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if the whole community does the same bad habit, it's just very easy to fall into it. Changing that habit might take, 30, 40 days narration, like a state. So we have a lot of work to do.
That habit can sometimes become part of the religion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have a lot of habits that are part of our religion now, aren't there?
Yeah. Well, it's great having you on this podcast. I'm hoping that inshallah you'll join us soon as well. You'll probably see or hear Sister Nour in your probably local center or lecturing. I know that you also lecture, so I'm sure the community here in London and other communities wherever you travel will benefit from your knowledge. It's great to have you on, and thank you for making time.
Thank you for having me.